can only imagine the conversations they had that night, like, son of a bitch, what do we do? But they did the same thing that I would do. My dad tried to educate me on his experience. He tried to provide me with as much information as possible, and then they allowed me to make my own choice. And I would have to do the same with my kids, but I would have to talk to them about the things that you mentioned, the consequence, the burden, the cost. Everybody talks about the price. And the service member, yeah, I'll agree to 4 years, and I might be killed and time away from my family. The cost of that, though, is like you mentioned, the families, the children, the burden on your social circle and your friends that I didn't even really recognize when I was in. I didn't realize how much fear and uncertainty and anxiety that just my single service, it was like the dropping a rock in a pond, right? And it just extrapolates outward. But I was so, probably the best word is selfish, because I was so front side focused, no pun intended, on my career and what I was doing. I didn't realize it until afterwards. Like, holy shit, what I put my parents through after, serving 10 years post 9/11, I can't even fathom that. But if my kids wanted to do that, I would at least have to explain those things to them, and not in a way where I'm trying to really, manipulate that, just giving them as much information as possible. And then I have to step back. I think it's fair that you would want to do that. Informed decisions writ large, I think improve our society in the direction of our society. It's when you don't talk about those things and then you are unwillingly, bearing the brunt of them. I think that's when we really get into trouble.
No, you're absolutely correct. Look, I mean, I guess that it strikes me, at my age, right? Pre 9/11 Bill wouldn't have hesitated to say, yeah, join. It's great for you. Sure, there's risks or there's sacrifice, but it's a good cause. You're defending your country. You're all of those things. I guess that would be naive Bill, but cynical Bill at age 55 he's a very different person than he was.
That's the way of life. Yeah.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, my driver's license, I don't understand, because it tells me that I'm much older than I feel. And I am emotionally still at 13, maybe 14. An argument could be made. But you know what I meant? Those experiences and that additional lens and context, it helps when, at least if they want to listen, I can provide information, do what you want to with the information. Question for you, bringing it back to Afghanistan.
Sure.
Outside of Taliban and al-Qaeda, the Bagram Air Base, the way that we left there, never heard of anything like that. The amount of material that we left behind, you mentioned it a little bit, night vision goggles, weapons. There was a fucking video of the Taliban flying a helicopter with a dude hanging from it shortly after we left. My guess is it probably wasn't the Taliban flying that helicopter, which ties into my question. How fast do you think that other nations kind of rushed in there to either get as much equipment as possible, to evolve their equipment off of what we left behind? I'm just curious what you think, just more than just the Al-Qaeda and Taliban influence. How do you think other nation states acted when we took off? Do you think, because I had heard rumors that, China being a good example of kind of rushing in there. I'm just curious what you think the geopolitical response to that was.
Yeah, sure. And the Taliban to this day are still operating American Blackhawks and armored vehicles, Western armored vehicles, and tanks as well. So to get to your point, right, I bet you they have trained their pilots, because there have been some people that were trained for this, right? The Taliban were flying helicopters in the 1990s. But this is where the Pakistani support, particularly that influence from the Pakistani military and the ISI, which always backed the Taliban, even as they supposedly were our allies, the worst frenemies ever.
How could you say that? Bin Laden was only a mile and a half from their West Point, which was totally unknown to them, I'm sure.
They just couldn't see that one coming. I don't think people really, by the way, it's a great point. They don't understand what a cantonment is in Pakistan. It's like basically a military city that there's checkpoints in and out. You don't get into a place like Abbottabad. But to answer your question, we weren't providing the high-end Blackhawks, the high-end everything. Yeah. The Chinese, they create they create their own night vision. They create their own thermals. As a hobby of mine, I use some of it. Right, it's good stuff. So they have those abilities. I think more so the problem, I'm sure the Chinese I've heard this as well, right? The Pakistanis and the Chinese, they evaluated what was left behind. I don't think we left behind more so issues like radios, computer systems, if we didn't get a chance to destroy them, there was computer systems with personnel information and intelligence information. That was the stuff that they really wanted. Were we able to destroy 100% of it? I've heard no. I've heard a significant portion of that equipment was left behind. So to me, it was more of that type of information. Interrogate if they were able to capture, higher mid-level Afghan military intelligence officers to extract information. I've heard this as well, to extract information on how the U.S. worked with, but I've also heard that they've infiltrated that even while we were in country. So I don't think it wasn't a wealth of our top end military equipment. Whenever we provide aid to countries like Afghanistan, we're never giving them the tier 1 stuff. The Israelis might be the closest to getting the best stuff, but we know the Israelis aren't going to hand it over to the Chinese. We always realize that, an Afghan military commander might turn something over. But I do wonder, I've seen things like laser aiming modules and whatnot that the Chinese have developed. Did they develop these on their own, or were they able to take and re-engineer the stuff that they were able to obtain from Afghan special forces? So I have to wonder that with night vision and thermals as well.
Our leaving that equipment behind, certainly it didn't help anything.
Oh no, absolutely. I'm not trying to understand.
No. Yeah, I'm not saying that
it's an armory for jihadists. There's been reports of that equipment going into Pakistan, going into Central Asian states. There's been reports of that going into the Middle East and even into Africa. Now it's probably due to arms dealers are always going to redistribute wealth, but some of this has wind up into the hands of our enemies.
Yeah. If you were a policymaker today, and you had access to decision makers, what strategies would you come forward with or present to reduce Afghanistan in that region from becoming another launch pad for a 9/11 style attack?
Yeah, the first thing I would do is sit down and convince people that the Taliban aren't divided from al-Qaeda. They haven't separated. We can't use them to fight the Islamic State. You don't use terrorists to fight terrorists. And just I'd have to get that reset, right?